Marvel as a franchise took the storm of the cinemas back in the good old days. The lines were packed, the whole lineup of cinemas in my hometown were filled with only the Marvel movie for that week, and even I was one of the crowds. Their trend kickstarted the franchise to the mainstream media, and for the first time ever, Marvel was more popular than DC. That is until Endgame happened. The absolute peak of all Marvel movies set the standard high for Beyond, and soon, the franchise of the movie industry began to fall. That is when it invaded the gaming industry instead. There was no better time to introduce a hero shooter than then. Overwatch is failing, Team Fortress 2 is filled with clanks, and Aladdin is Aladdin. And so a new game came into fray. Overwatch players were looking for something new and decent, and NetEase delivered. The birth of Marvel Rivals. Before I start, I just want to say I'm streaming in for real this time. Like, look at this consistent schedule with Hades 2 and Hollow Knight, and also continuing Bloodborne soon, and I even did a 24-hour stream to myself for the Honey Haas. Please check it out, thanks. With the license of Marvel characters on its back, it was bound to have at least a decent launch. Even when the Marvel movie industry started failing, the franchise had already been implanted into mainstream, and people are most likely going to try out a game with Marvel characters in it. With a balanced lineup of both popularity and niche introductions, the game had the perfect roster for its launch. Some people came to test out the new, promising-looking Marvel game, some are there for their favorite character, and some are even there to try out the new interesting ones that they haven't seen before or from a niche comic that they read. In terms of roster density, Rivals actually has one of the best ones even until now, especially for a Marvel game. Very known ones are present, but they also take the opportunity to introduce the less popular ones, even though the popular ones will probably bank them the mainstream audience. And this roster did its part. Marvel Rivals proved to be potentially the next big thing in its launch. Even before it, the drip marketing and trailers proved to be effective due to its popular characters, and even niche but interesting ones that drove the people to at least try out the game, kickstarting it with almost 500,000 players, which isn't bad for a hero shooter's launch. Another driving factor to their uprising is the state of the hero shooters at the time. Aladdin is... well, we don't talk about that. Team Fortress 2 is like 99% bots, waiting to be perished by Valve, and the biggest contender, Overwatch, who was once the game of the year and truly set the multiplayer FPS games ahead across the genres, but fucked it all up the moment they put the 2 in there, going downhill since then. In that dark era of hero shooters, people were seeking for a fierce challenger, either to take refuge or just to instill fear into Overwatch to make them reverse lobotomy. Hence, when Rivals came, people took it as the saving grace, the Overwatch killer, or to some, the Overwatch saver, as the threat of it might be the one to crank the gears of Overwatch. And it did give that image given the state of everything and of the other games. People actually felt like it's going to be the hero shooter, even increasing to 600,000 players a month later when the Fantastic Four update dropped. However, beyond the mountain's peak is nothing but a slope. Despite its powerful and successful launch, Marvel Rivals was far from perfect. Like almost every game in this day of age for some fucking reason, it launched with problems, mainly optimization. Like again, every other game released. Back in Season 0, you'd need a computer from NASA to even run like 200 plus FPS. This very issue drove a lot of people out initially. While the numbers still held high even with the issue, this had already started the train's engine on performance issues, becoming a constant discussion as players expect for any improvements or fixes on every update. As a hero shooter, balance is one of the most difficult things to get right. A 20 to 30 character roster, each with different sets of abilities and weapons that are tied to them, each with different roles, proving to be very volatile to the meta shifts and imbalance of power. Marvel Rivals is a great example of that. With each character having unique skill sets and utilities, ironically the thing that became an issue with the balancing and meta is homogenization, the roided out transcendences. While Zenyatta, my boy from Overwatch, only has 6 to 7 seconds for his Transcendence ult, the supports in Rivals had around 12 seconds of total ult time. That's double the time of basically immortality across the whole team. Hence, this was always a recurring discussion. This also made the game basically a battle of support ults, as 12 seconds of immortality in a time-crucial game is like a winning factor on who used it more efficiently, ultimately making the whole meta stale for some people. It also didn't help that the combined number of tanks and supports aren't greater than the number of DPS, lacking variety in the supports department. And picking the other supports with a much more unique ult just resulted to basically throwing for giving up a 12-second immortality for like once every 1 to 3 minutes. So you're stuck with 7 supports that are in reality only 3 or barely 4 choices if you wanna win. The bad role distribution also caused tank or support players to grow out of the game quickly due to the limiting choices. No role queue is great, but if you combine that with an absurd ratio of DPS to tanks and supports, people that don't care are most likely going DPS just because of its variety of options. So almost every game, you get a DPS ego check that aren't willing to swap to anything other than DPS, overall making the experience for everyone worse, and affecting people's stay on the game heavily. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of the decay of Marvel Rivals. With having a decent but with a few hiccups of a launch, Marvel Rivals had the potential to become the next big thing if led in the right direction. As it turns out, the game only went downhill from then. Having an initial issue of piss-poor optimization, Rivals had the opportunity to polish it with such a tremendous launch despite the absence of optimal performance. It was already huge that the game itself was good enough to overshadow a bit of the performance issues. Focus on fixing that and you'll have a proper game with the potential of staying audience. However, this wasn't really the case. For the next few months, Rivals had the same performance as it did on launch, which then eventually had people fed up and just abandoned the game. Very later on in the patches though, there were some gradual improvements to the performance, but note that I say later and gradual. Even until now, it's still poor optimization. It's not as worse as it was on launch. But how about the balance? Having met with 3 double the length Zen ults, surely they will nerf it and give the other unique support ults a chance to shine further and make it so that there's variety within the support choices in the game, right? No. They just made the other ones basically budget Zen ults too. I guess now the other supports are also getting picked, but it doesn't stray away from the support ult meta, and the game still feels like who did the better support ult. With how broken supports are in this game, and with how easy they are to use too, supports are like the pillars of competitive in this game, in a bad way. So much so that triple support meta has been the reoccurring potential comp since launch. It's almost like you're just sitting at spawn with the amount of healing the comp does. And for ults, imagine having almost 40 seconds of immortality in a game where overtime is so rampant and crucial. Not to mention the supports hit hard too, so you're not really lacking on damage if played correctly. Gambit's kit so far proves to be a better sight for the future of the game though. A non-transcendence ult and an anti-heal, and a cleanse and also damage. Basically the jack of all trades. Get it? Although the other changes, buffs, purely buffs, seems like a big step in the wrong direction. A familiar direction. But we shall see. Supports are the meta, which says a lot in a game where almost everyone is strong, which also makes it kind of fun to be fair. And these support mains have the audacity to complain and start a movement. But competitively, with the way of how this meta is, that is just not a good gameplay balancing. At launch we had 8 tanks, 7 supports, and 18 DPS. But given that it's launch, we can shrug this off as maybe leaning into the DPS more to allow people to have more fun with the game, because the DPS does have the most fun kits in the game. It's a good strategy to hook people in, especially for a game's launch. You'd want to prioritize people having fun to make them stay in the game. But that was on launch. That's just considering things to make it somewhat reasonable. So, you know, how about we check on the current roster? Oh, yeah, almost every season that goes by, there will always be a duelist. Almost always. Which doesn't help people wanting to lock in DPS every single time. Good thing Gambit's a strategist, and Rogue is looking like a strategist too. Or even a tank, but please no DPS. This imbalance of roster affects the meta, gameplay, and everyone's experience in playing the game. This one doesn't seem like an actual issue, but it did affect people's opinion on the game, and probably the dumbest reason for its decline so far, the engagement-optimized matchmaking. People had this theory that Marvel Rivals uses EOMM, and while it's been declined by NetEase, the community does not fully believe this claim. In my honest opinion, and based on my experience, it's not real. And I even doubt that most people who talk about EOMM know what that even means. If you don't know, it's essentially a matchmaking method to keep you playing, rather than fair skill-based matchmaking. The fact that people can climb up faster after getting a reset debunks this easily. I have noticed no patterns whatsoever. Some days are so fucking bad, some days are godly good, and some days are just normal. Although, it is a much easier cause to blame for your losses, which is why most people think of it as real, because they can't accept their actual reason for losing so much. It might be real though, but even if it was, if you're actually good enough, you could pretty much climb out of easier ranks when you deserve it. Either way, such a stupid reason, but it did drive people away, something non-existent.
Marvel Rivals does not use EOMM.
This is a test. I'm gonna flash some images in a fast-paced manner and tell me what you feel. Yep, those were all from, you guessed it, Marvel Rivals. Now, to be honest, this is not really an issue, at least for me. Clearly, they are leaning to the sexual appeal of the game for the masses. But I think that's just their approach and there's nothing really wrong with that. I wasn't even sure of including this, but it was worth noting, because realistically, it still drove some people off, especially for those who care about stuff like these. But at the same time, it also drives people in. Love it or hate it, the goon method works a lot, especially in today's society. And let's all not be oblivious that these aren't gooner skins, like come on. Let's be real here. Either way, it did have an effect on some people and also made the game controversial, but not really affecting numbers that much, just an honorable mention. Probably the biggest nail in the coffin, at least based on what I experienced. To some people, Marvel Rivals is just a catalyst to Overwatch overhaul, and surely enough, it was exactly that. To everyone's surprise, Blizzard did care, outside of microtransactions and Kirko, and they released a huge update that might have just been what the game needed. After the perks, stadium, and loot box update, it was noticeable that there was a gradual decrease to Rivals player count. Matches took longer to find, and less people were talking about it. While we can't really see Overwatch's true player count, it can also be denied that the update that they made actually revived the game. And with the ongoing issues in Marvel Rivals that are yet to be fixed, players switching back to Overwatch was inevitable. I'll be honest, even though I find Rivals more fun to play, competitively Overwatch is just better. In the perfect grinding mood, Overwatch is just a better option, and for most multiplayer gamers, they are more likely to play the competitively stable game than something more fun, and Marvel Rivals isn't competitively stable. So, is Marvel Rivals dead? Not quite yet. With all that in mind, it is clear as day that Marvel Rivals is declining in players. Though is it dying? You could say that it gradually is, and it might even continue to, if they're dying on this hill they're going for. But regardless, it seems like NetEase is just doing its own thing, and have a different goal in mind than competing. Obviously they are, but what I mean is their focus is pretty different. That's also allowed them to continue thus far. Despite their shortcomings, they do listen and engage to the community, trying to be relatable and implementing community-created concepts in the game, like emotes, sprays, and MVPs. And they're not really afraid of going far with it. Just don't ask them about bouncing, because, you know, they have to have something to not listen to. Even with the noticeable decline on its player base, NetEase isn't really scared to try something new and fresh. You would think that they're strapped to just arcade modes or normal game modes, but they're actually always trying something new, which is always a double-edged sword, but they're not afraid of the blade they get hit on. You wouldn't expect for a dying game like this to make these decisions, and yet here they do. Marvel Rivals feels like it has a different direction than the others, mainly Overwatch. Its balance seems off, its contents are unexpected, and the gameplay such as team-ups are pretty unique. I think it's pretty conclusive that they're aiming for a fun game rather than a competitive game, while still not fully abandoning the competitiveness, although playing against Triple Emerald is not fun. And I think going for this route might actually be better. Going for a completely different vibe of a game rather than forcing your way to compete to a very powerful IP in the gaming industry. I think this might be the better choice. It also allows for people to not just pick between the two same games, and actually play both for their different feels, like me. While this essentially means that they're accepting defeat in that aspect, this at least secures a specific audience that prefer this type of game. But again, this all depends on what they'll do in the future. I love Marvel Rivals. It's a fun game. It's the competitive game that barely tilts me. It's like the chill, but also competitive game that I was looking for, which I thought was impossible. But we can't deny the state of the game, and I genuinely Hope for its survival and success. Because, come on, I bought too many skins, man. Dialogue has me in a chokehold, and I hope also literally. And this hope continues with Season 5, because it's looking like it'll need all the hope it can get. Balancing aside, it is a stacked season, filled with love. But are those enough to fortify its foundation? To feed its future generation? To answer the main question. With all of that in mind, is Marvel Rivals dying? Well,